What's going on, U.S. history people? We have video number 3 for you on breaking down the multiple choice portion of the Regents Exam. This one is on the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, and the Presidency of George Washington. As always, I am breaking down the exam, so make sure you know what's in here, and it will help you on your multiple choice portion of the test. All right, so let's start talking about the Articles of Confederation. This appeared on 2 of the 5 previous exams, and you need to know what they were. They were America's first governing document. And it's important to know that the government under the Articles was very weak. It created a weak central government, and other words for central are federal and national. So when you see Articles of Confederation, think weak government. It did not last long. It was only around until 1789 because it was so weak. And types of questions that have been asked about the Articles include, why were they replaced? You know this. Why were they replaced? Because they were weak. The government could not enforce its laws. So think of any answer that shows that the government is weak. The other question that was asked stated, why was this time called the critical period? And that was because the central government lacked power. And ultimately, the Articles were replaced because they were weak. All right, let's go over the Constitutional Convention. Couple compromises you need to know. The first one is the Great Compromise, which has been on 3 out of 5 previous exams. So you need to know the Virginia Plan. This proposed that representation in Congress would be based on population. So the more population you had, the more representatives you would have in Congress. This was favored by states with a large population, such as Virginia. Now, on the other end, we have the small states, and the New Jersey Plan, which said representation should be equal. So the two sides get together and they hammer out a compromise, and this is called the Great Compromise. Now, this creates a bicameral or a 2-house legislature. Do me a favor, star, circle, underline, highlight, whatever you have to do to the word bicameral to know that it's important. You will see this on the exam. Bi means 2. Cameral means house legislature. So a 2-house legislature. One is the House, which is based on population, and one is equal, which is the Senate. We see this today, and that is our Congress or our Capitol building here. So what are the types of questions asked? Well, what was the result of the Great Compromise? It's your bicameral legislature. You see that word bicameral. The difference between the Virginia and New Jersey plans, the only difference was how congressional representation would be. So again, when you see the Great Compromise, think bicameral, think representation. And the issue that the Great Compromise addressed, it addressed determining state representation. So when you see the Great Compromise, you were to think bicameral and representation. Bicameral and representation. Bicameral, representation. Representation, bicameral. All right, let's go over to the 3/5 compromise. This was only on 1 of the previous 5, but I have seen it in older exams. And this stated that 3 out of 5 slaves would count as representation for the House. Now think, what area of the country were most slaves located in? That's right, the South. So this is going to benefit the South. So type of questions asked, the effect of the 3/5 compromise, we see an increase in representation for the South. The South gets more representation because 3 out of 5 slaves count towards representation. Slaves could not vote, don't misunderstand me. They just counted towards representation in the House of Representatives. So this is a continuation of the representation debate of the Great Compromise. Now when you see the 3/5, think representation. All right, let's go over checks and balances. 3 of 5 previous exams, and checks and balances is keeping one branch from having too much power. So types of questions asked. See a couple different headlines, things like the Senate rejects a Supreme Court nominee, or Congress overrides Truman veto of the Taft-Hartley Act. You see the Senate, that's part of the legislative branch. You see the Supreme Court, that's part of the judicial branch. So we're talking about 2 different branches. Then you see Congress, which is legislative, and Truman, who is the president, that is the executive branch. So anytime you see 2 branches mentioned in a headline, chances are it's talking about checks and balances. So these are examples of checks and balances. If you see 2 branches listed, again, make sure you know that. And also you can see which of the following was an example of checks and balances, and you see the impeachment of the president, or Congress impeaches or tries to remove the president. Here is a visual I came up with of checks and balances. Make sure you are familiar with this, or you could at least identify the checks and balances. All right, ratification of the Constitution, 3 out of 5 previous exams. Ratifying means to approve. So some people, known as anti-federalists, opposed the Constitution because they feared it was too strong. Federal means national government. Anti-federalists were afraid of the national government. So types of questions asked. Reasons for anti-federalist opposition. They wanted a Bill of Rights, and ultimately this dude, James Madison, will help create them. They wanted a Bill of Rights which would list rights that you as an American have, things like freedom of speech, freedom of press, etc. Then we have the Federalist Papers. These were written to gather or garner support for ratification of the Constitution. So if you see a question about why or how was the Constitution ultimately ratified, you're going to look for either a Bill of Rights or Federalist Papers. Now, what was an argument used against ratification? Again, the original Constitution did not have a Bill of Rights, so those would be added to gain support of anti-federalists. So when you see ratification of the Constitution, you are to think Bill of Rights or Federalist Papers. All right, we'll finish up with Washington's presidency. 3 out of 5 previous exams, although one exam had 2 questions during his presidency. So types of questions asked. Well, definitely know that Washington advocated or favored neutrality, staying out of foreign affairs. This will be a big idea throughout American history. He wanted the U.S. to avoid wars or conflict in Europe. Another thing that I've seen a couple times is Alexander Hamilton, his Secretary of Treasury, he planned to create a Bank of the United States or a national bank. This was very controversial at the time. He wanted the government to create a bank. And the answer is going to be something about improving the economy of the nations. When you see Alexander Hamilton, you are to think economy, improving the economy or the national bank. What was the result of Hamilton's financial plan? That was another question, and your answer is going to be a creation of a national bank. So when you see Alexander Hamilton, you're to think national bank or economic stability. Then we have the Whiskey Rebellion. This was a rebellion in 1794 against taxes, and this shows that the power of the federal government was strong enough to enforce laws because George Washington and the government quickly crushed these violent protests. So the new government is strong. Whiskey Rebellion equals strong government because they crushed it. Whiskey Rebellion, strong government. Alexander Hamilton, national bank or Bank of the United States. Again, Hamilton equals national bank or Bank of the United States. If you see a question about Hamilton or his financial plan, you are to think Bank of the United States. All right, thank you very much for watching. We will break down nationalism and sectionalism next. This will go from 1800 to the Civil War. We'll talk about my boy, Henry Clay. He appears occasionally on the Regents Exam, so do not sleep on Henry Clay. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good day.